Awesome. Well, hey, Andrew, how's it
Awesome.
going?
Hey, man.
Hey, so I'm really excited for us to get smarter today about all the acronyms that we use in informatics.
There are so many. Second
So
only to
many.
aviation in the military.
That's right. So, why don't we talk about things that relate to diagnosis codes and billing codes? And so, I'd say let's kick off with trying to better understand ICD-10 codes, SNOMED designation, CPT codes, and HCCs. So, wherever you'd like to kick off.
Yeah, it's a great group. They're all related for sure. Related in different ways. So we can kind of compare and contrast, talk about purpose, why are they used in different cases? Why were they developed and designed? Why are they maintained? Why are there so many of these acronyms for what seems to be a relatively consistent purpose? So let's unpack it. So if we start with ICD-10, I think all the clinicians in our community are very familiar with our ICD-10. Some of them may be familiar with ICD-9 as well, and may have gone through the ICD-9, ICD-10 transition. It was a big movement for EMRs back in 2014-ish, I think. So starting from the top, right? ICD, International Classification of Diseases, and then it has these version numbers. In the United States, it is the terminology or ontology, and I'll use those terms interchangeably. Ontology, of course, kind of meaning a system of understanding, a semantic structure, right? And in the US, it is absolutely pivotal in practice because, drum roll, it's how you get paid, right? From an informatics perspective, it's important for sure, but from a commercial perspective, it is critical. And you can't submit an insurance claim in the United States without ICD-10 codes. And so the ICD-10, what I want our community to understand is ICD-10 is a relatively simple and small ontology. It is a tree, right? So when we think about concept structures or ontologies, you can visualize these concepts, you can visualize meaning. And I'm going to share a screen briefly so we can see what I mean exactly by this. One sec. So here is a very cool GitHub page I just found online from Holtze. And this visualizes the tree structure of ICD-10. The sort of root concept, which is kind of a placeholder here, is the leftmost node. And then ICD-10 is split into categories that are sort of the highest level classification of disease. And within that, let's choose digestive, for example. You can drill down a layer in the tree to the next set of codes. And these are the high level codes. Now, folks may be familiar with this concept of what's billable, what's not billable. In this level of specificity, the reason why we went from 9 to 10 was it increased dramatically the specificity of the codes, and it allows for much more granular billing or claim adjudication process to understand, laterality, what's initial versus sequential. More details related to enable insurance companies to make adjudication decisions with more specificity. So this is the structure of ICD-10. In the US healthcare system, it's used to classify problem lists. So from a practicing clinician perspective, and even from the pharmacy perspective, you'll get indications as an ICD-10, right? When that message gets transmitted from provider to pharmacy, the indication for the medicine will be an ICD-10 code or more than one. And so it lives everywhere. Now, in the US, the Office of the National Coordinator for Health Information Technology, ONC, as we sort of abbreviate it, they're responsible for regulating health IT, EMRs in particular. And the requirement is that problem lists are coded not just in ICD-10, this tree structure, but they're also coded in SNOMED CT. So SNOMED stands for Standard Nomenclature of Medicine. Quite the lofty statement. And then the CT is the clinical terminologies or clinical terms, I believe. It's from ITSIDU, which that's a very creative pronunciation. ITSIDU, like everyone knows HL7, the Standard Development Organization, that also has the eponymous standard itself, HL7 message format, V2 and V3. Very confusing, right? The organization itself is called HL7, and then they have a standard called HL7, and many other standards like CCDA and FHIR. But for SNOMED, so SNOMED is a standard from the organization IHTSDO, IHTSDO. And I think that's International Health Terminology Standard Development Organization. And the way you say that is IHTSDO. So anyway, that's no one needs to say that word again, least of all me. But it's a massive collaboration among an international group. It is so much bigger than ICD-10. This is the first thing really to take away. SNOMED is a very comprehensive effort and a comprehensive ontology. Now, let me put some numbers on it. So ICD-10 is like on the order of, if we were to drill into all these nodes here, it might be, I think it's around 70,000 concepts, specific codes to classify diseases, right? That's its domain. Now, it's been, because of its role in billing, it also is used to classify, I think folks probably are familiar with the Z codes, the encounter for codes. So it's been like a little bit mutated or abused to classify not just diseases, but also encounters for treatment or prevention of diseases. It feels a little bit off-piste for what it was initially designed to do, but that's that, 70,000. Think of that as the size of the ontology. SNOMED's on the order of 5 million, right? So dramatically, that's 2 orders of magnitude larger than ICD-10. And it does not just treat diseases or concern itself with diseases. It concerns itself with anatomy, with sort of medications, treatments, interventions, concepts, abstract concepts like, in ICD-10, for example, you have laterality, left and right, left eye, right eye. In SNOMED, you don't have left eye and right eye. You have the concept left and the concept right and the concept eye. And then you can combine those concepts together to produce the understanding of what a left eye or a right eye is. And so this structure is fundamentally different. It is not a tree. ICD-10 is a tree. SNOMED CT is a directed graph. So the concepts are the nodes in the graph, and then the attributes or the relationships between the concepts are the edges, and they have a direction. Let me provide a visualization here to make it clear. So this is from some friends at Nebraska. Let's zoom in so we can get a better sense. The nodes here that are colored blue, green, and orange are concepts in SNOMED. So viral pneumonia is a disorder that no doubt exists in ICD-10, some concept like this, right? Now, you can see in SNOMED, the lung structure over here, the lung, right, is also a distinct concept. And it is related by way of a finding site, right? So this, no, unfortunately, we can't read this particular concept, but I think this is probably like, some specific finding related to viral pneumonia. And then we're connecting it through this relationship or this attribute of finding site that was found in the lung structure, right? And so these concepts can be composed in a much richer understanding. At least in theory, in clinical informaticists, I think universally prefer SNOMED CT over ICD-10 because of the richness in the ontology and the ability that you can combine concepts with these attributes. Now, in practice, this is the tough part. In practice, at least in the United States, for the most part, SNOMED gets only a secondary glance from practices. It's only the most advanced practices or health systems that will go on and do and curate do analytical work and curate the SNOMED codes and analyze SNOMED coded data sets to be able to analyze their operations and so on and so forth. ICD-10, because of its role in commerce and for payment in healthcare, tends to dominate SNOMED CT in terms of effort and attention. But SNOMED CT is there, and there are also crosswalks and maps that researchers have worked on. None of them are perfect. You cannot automatically crosswalk from ICD-10 to SNOMED CT or vice versa. But just know in your work as a clinician who codes, as you're analyzing data or thinking about developing applications that apply the metadata, that you want to keep in mind anytime you have, diseases, disorders, etc. Think about both of these ontologies and explore ways to use both. You'll get sort of richer analytical results if you take that approach. So that's ICD-10 and SNOMED CT. I think we also have so this concept of HCC, which is sort of leaning or going down the commercial or payment path, completely leaves SNOMED CT behind. HCC has not a thing to do with SNOMED CT. It's an interesting concept. So the folks who take care of Medicare beneficiaries in the United States, no doubt are familiar with this concept of risk adjustment and a risk-adjusted coding, or the risk adjustment factor. Some people will say RAF, right? What's the RAF score? And that's a scalar value. It's a single number. It's sort of normalized to 1. So you have like a quote unquote average sickness or average disease burden elder in the US would be sort of normalized as a risk adjustment factor of 1. Like, what does that mean and where does that come from? That's what HCC is used for, is to produce that number. So let me describe what it is and how it's used, and also why, like, man, I cannot wait until we move beyond this. It is crazy, in my opinion. It is crazy. So we know ICD-10 is the ontology used in submitting claims. And so what this means is one of the biggest claim processors in the US is the US federal government, Medicare. So they have like reams and reams of claims and ICD-10 codes associated with costs that they pay. And someone somewhere, I wish I knew the exact history, I'm sure there's like great storytelling here, came up with the idea to say, hey, could we predict actually how much a patient is going to cost US taxpayers based on what ICD-10 codes they have to characterize their problem list, their disease burden? And so I guess a group of people thought this was a good idea. And so they built some statistical models, regression models, specifically regression. So we're trying to predict a continuous outcome variable cost, which is measured in US dollars, with a categorical input variable, which is ICD-10 code, right? And so one of the challenges, and this is different now post LLM, but keep in mind risk adjustment, HCC regression models were created far before LLMs. But a real challenge is, like, if you're trying to predict a continuous outcome variable cost with a collection of categorical input variables, you have to do you have to binarize. So the binarize meaning, like, this concept of ICD-10, people would think of it as one variable. It's one variable. It's like ICD-10, and then, what are the ICD-10s involved? But computationally, if you want to create a statistical model, you have to take every single individual ICD-10 code and you have to give it a 0-1 value. And so if you've got 70,000 ICD-10 variables, it's like, does this patient have this one, 0-1? Does it have that one, 0-1? And it becomes intractable to actually get results. So that is why HCC exists. HCC said, well, that dimensionality is too big for us to predict cost. So we need to group ICD-10 codes into a few hundred, not tens of thousands, but a few hundred. And so we have this HCC hierarchical condition category, which is a category of conditions of ICD-10 codes that together represent a predictor variable in that linear regression model. So you have, everyone probably remembers from stats class, like the typical linear regression equation would be like beta 1 times x1 plus beta 2 times x2 equals y, right? And that's, you're trying to estimate or fit weights on beta 1 and beta 2. And those beta 1 and beta 2 here are the HCC weights. So when you say HCC score, the HCC weights, you'll hear folks in risk adjustment groups will talk about HCC weights. They're actually the regression weights against those groups of ICD-10 codes. And that's how this whole model was developed. And so if you take those weights, they're fitted. If you then sum them up, you get the RAF, the risk adjustment factor. So this whole approach to assessing risk is attempting to predict cost to US taxpayers based on groups of ICD-10 codes in order to handle the intractability of binary ICD-10 codes. And so what we have now is we have a practice and an investment in specialized assets and time and attention in the US healthcare system to choose ICD-10 codes in a way that reflects clinical reality, right? There's real efforts. I don't want to paint everything as sort of a commercial game here, but there's a real effort to keep what is accurate in terms of the patient's reflecting the patient's disease burden, but in such a way that any opportunity to choose the right HCC code with a weight that maximizes reimbursement, that those opportunities are found and they're taken. And it results in things like, for example, if you had an ICD-10 code for diabetes and a separate ICD-10 code for CKD, neither of those individually may be grouped in an HCC with a weight. They may be ungrouped and unweighted. But if we characterize or express it semantically differently, and we say diabetes with renal complications as one code, that code belongs to an HCC group with a weight and clinically is identical or equivalent, but then from a commercial perspective comes with a different reimbursement. And now we have this, I would say from a medical perspective, an unnecessary complication in managing healthcare and health information and clinical workflow. And so that's where we are with HCC. What I hope for is that it just goes away. HCC is not a concept that people talk about anymore. And we take a more state-of-the-art approach on choosing how US taxpayers should fund care for individuals. What is appropriate funding for care? And we just have such better technology now. We're like 25 years or more ahead in terms of technology and understanding risk and prediction than what the HCC models currently have. But it is unfortunately still the reality. It's like another way that healthcare is a time warp. And for all the international folks that might be listening to this, like, yeah, it's another way that I guess you can be grateful that you don't have to deal with it, I suppose.
Yeah, totally. This was a great explanation. Absolutely, Andrew. Speaking about the next category, CPT codes, and you often see them right next to ICD-10 codes in the EMRs. What light can you shed on how they were created and how they've evolved?
Yeah, so CPT is current procedural terminology. And yes, we see them on US claim forms, right? They are the things that actually carry a price tag, right? So in some sense, I remember at some point, I think I posted something about like fee-for-service billing in the US is like row-oriented healthcare, and value-based care is column-oriented. And what I meant by that is if you look at a claim, a health insurance claim in the US, the CPT codes are the rows, right? In this table, every claim has a table, and the CPT codes are the rows. And then there's columns, and the columns are the ICD-10 codes. And again, ICD-10 is disease, and CPT is what procedure or intervention, whether it's a diagnostic procedure like a biopsy or a suture or treatment, or in vaccine, injection, evaluation and management code, the procedure is the row, and that's the thing that has the price on it. In fee-for-service healthcare, literally, so fee-for-service would be price for CPT, right? That's what, when we say fee-for-service healthcare, it means price for CPT. And that's the rows on the claim form. And then the columns, so in the adjudication process for health insurers, they will look at, okay, for this patient, with this provider, at this time, with their history, does this ICD-10 code or collection of ICD-10 codes justify the charge? And should we pay? Do we cover? And so like this idea that we've moved from fee for service to value-based care is like a huge transformation. I think theoretically it is, but in practice, often it means like, well, we care more about HCC weights and ICD-10 codes, which are the columns, and then we care a little bit less about the CPTs, which are the rows. It gets a little muddled too because CPT has different versions, and there is a tracking code set for CPT that doesn't have it's like $0 prices. So it'd be like CPT code for the fact that hypertension or blood pressure was recorded, kind of thing, which is a funny. All these things are these abuses, I'll call it, from a clinical informatics perspective, come because payers are like, look, I don't want to get medical record information in your stupid HIE with your stupid CCD or fire whatever. Like, I'm being pejorative here. That's not, there are many well-intentioned, but they're just like, I don't want to do that. I'm really good at getting claims data, like really good at getting claims data. So just pass me the information I want in the claim field. And so we'll create a new CPT category that's for tracking, and we'll be very good at ingesting that information. So now all of this is a bit of a lead in to answer your actual question, which is like, what is CPT? Where did it come from? How does it work? So like, this is probably the kind of thing that should be off record, but we're, safe space, I guess. I was surprised when, I started having to pay to use CPT codes. And if you think about so CPT as a standard, like it is just like ICD-10, you have to use ICD-10 to get paid in traditional US healthcare. You have to use it. Now, you also have to use CPT. What's the difference? Well, ICD-10 is free and open. CPT is not free. It is property of the American Medical Association. So the CPT code set is intellectual property that the AMA owns, and everyone who uses it has to pay royalty fees to the AMA. So in some sense, the AMA has a monopoly on charging for services, for medical services, right? And you could say, oh, well, ICD-10 has a monopoly on, we'll say, whoa, okay, it's open and free. That's the thing. It doesn't cause harm. So you can't get paid for services in the traditional model unless you pay the AMA for royalties. And by the way, so these royalties are like, it's not a one-time thing. You continuously pay the AMA for continued use of the CPT code set. And there's real work involved. I don't want to minimize like the CPT codes. They take effort to update. They take effort to maintain and distribute and do quality checks, issue errata, all those things. But the ICD-10 teams, the SDOs, they do that too, and it's funded a different way. So anyway, that's sort of the reality that we're in. I'm not sure what an alternative, like short of abandoning claims and really going to a capitated model, or you're completely rethinking how this works. This is sort of the situation we're in. We have a monopoly in describing payments in the US healthcare system. I should mention also from a clinical informatics perspective, like CPTs are useful, but they're often useful in conjunction with other terminology systems, right? So if you, for example, immunize a child or your MA does or whatever, what have you, a CPT code will be associated with that for sure to get paid. And it does carry real information that's useful for analytics, et cetera. but you would want to also pair it with other terminologies that are appropriate, like CVX is the right one for medicine, probably also, or excuse me, for immunization, probably also SNOMED CT. So these code systems should be combined. You should never be in a situation where the only code you have to describe something is CPT. That's my recommendation and always what I endeavor to do when I'm dealing with systems. But I think that's a whirlwind tour of ICD-10, SNOMED CT, HCC, and CPT for our first informatics acronym soup.
This is great.